Welcome to Question Time. Tonight we are in Morecambe. On tonight's panel, James Heappey, an officer in the army before becoming an MP. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan and is now the government's Minister for the Armed Forces. Labour's Shadow Business Secretary, previously Shadow Minister in several departments under both Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer, Jonathan Reynolds. Alison Phillips, journalist and editor of the Daily Mirror, which led the way in breaking stories of partying at number 10 during the pandemic. Entrepreneur and founder of her own IT company specialising in healthcare and participant in TV programmes such as Secret Millionaire and The Apprentice You're Fired, Kavita Oberoi, and economist, author, former Moscow correspondent at The Economist and GB News presenter, Liam Halligan. Good evening. Welcome to my panel. Welcome to the audience here in Morecambe. Very nice to see you, and very nice to see you at home, of course, as well. Thank you for joining us, and do join in the conversation in the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. So, let's take our first question, which is from Rob Wiley.
Hi. With the cost of living crisis, should the national insurance rise be postponed?
Which will be coming in April. What's your view, Rob?
I think it probably should be. There's a lot of people, especially in areas like this, as having their finances squeezed, and they're struggling as it is. We've got energy, fuel prices going through the roof, all that sort of thing. You'd be very lucky if you get a wage rise in this area that matches inflation. People who work full-time, long hours, not just 40-hour weeks, 50-hour weeks, 60-hour weeks, are struggling to make ends meet, and it's just... I think it could do with being held off.
Should it be postponed?
Well, Cabinet agreed to do it, and I think it was the right decision to take, given that the point of it is to raise money that is much needed to both address the iniquity of social care provision in this country and the waiting lists that have built up during the pandemic that we need to address within the NHS.
You've got a number of Conservative MPs now saying that it should be delayed, not least the head of the Treasury Select Committee, a former minister. Do you think that line will hold? Well,
look, I mean, I think you'll have noticed that the top of the government is in listening mode at the moment, but the Cabinet took the decision, and I think that it's important to recognise that actually, as a tax, it will, I think, sort of 50% of the revenue is raised by the top 14% of taxpayers, and there's 6 million people that pay nothing at all. So, it isn't the blunt instrument that some people have described it as. But I know, and it's the same for all of us, that prices are rising quickly. There is a challenge to how we make ends meet. We're fortunate to have, I think, on the panel, jobs that pay pretty well. But there are plenty of people that are on good salaries that are starting to worry about how they're going to make things meet, and the government is seeking to address that, both through interventions in the energy market and £500 million for those who are really struggling to help with their bills and cost of living. But we're going to need to do a lot, I think, over the next few years to help people with this.
Alison.
Well, I think Rob's hit the nail on the head in that we're looking at a really, really tough sort of winter going into spring ahead. Inflation 6%, and then this, and then energy bills. I mean, that is going to come as a horrible shock to people fairly shortly. Ordinary families, they're going to be looking at something like £500 extra per year on their energy bills. So it's going to be particularly difficult for those that are least well off, but it's going to be really tough, I think, for everybody in this country. And we're now looking at this, the national insurance hike, which was decided on back in September, when inflation wasn't looking as bad as it is now, which we're now looking at 6%. Things have got considerably worse in the interim. And I think when I talk to sort of our readers, Mirror readers, sort of, that what their main concern that can make is it doesn't sort of feel very fair, because this also, of course, is much harder on younger people. It's much harder on people on lower incomes as well. And there are other ways that this money could be raised. Yes, we need to address shortages in the NHS. Yes, we need to sort out, finally, social care. But this doesn't seem to have been the fairest way to do it. And something has to be looked at.
All right. Got a few hands up. Yes, the woman here.
Yeah, the hike in the national insurance is 1.5%. You're saying
1.25.
Yeah. 1.25, which
percentage points, actually.
Well,
which is different from percentage.
Well done. Yeah, which is small when you think about the rise in inflation. And that rise in inflation doesn't take into account the real cost to people on low incomes. Because when you actually look at that and the things that they buy, the non-electric guitars and all the stuff that they put in that to get to that figure, they're lower price goods in the supermarket, so that inflation is even higher. So in light of that, if they do delay it, 1.25% as opposed to everything else that's going on and the energy bills that are going to be horrendous, and people aren't getting rises, the pensioners have been, you know, done over again with the triple lock. And there are lots of people, like the gentleman says, especially in this area, that are on very low incomes, and they're going to really, really suffer. So the 1.25%, yeah, needs looking at. That isn't the whole picture. There's an awful lot more there.
OK. The woman here in the grey sweater.
So against this backdrop, some years ago, Liz Truss said that public sector workers should take personal responsibility for the money they spend and save. Does the panel think that Liz Truss should take personal responsibility for the private jet she flew to Australia at an estimated cost of £500,000 to the taxpayer?
James, you just very quickly want to deal with that, because that's been in the news tonight. So this is a flight that Liz Truss took, obviously Foreign Secretary, to Australia. It was a government Airbus, as opposed to your regular, you know, Qantas or British Airways or whatever it might be. And it is reported to have cost something like £500,000.
Well, I mean,
value for money?
Well, I read the story, and I think what happened is another operator of private aviation has said it would cost £500,000. I think if it's already a jet that's leased by the government, I suspect it probably didn't cost that.
So how much did it cost?
But I don't know the operational security concerns that went into her deciding to travel privately. But I read the same story.
Do you approve?
It did cost £500,000. Well, you know, last week I flew to Kiev on a private RAF-operated flight because the security and operational situation required me to fly on an RAF private plane to Kiev on the job that I was doing and the people that I was flying with, because the stuff we were going to do was sensitive. So, you know, having flown on a private plane myself in the last 10 days,
war in Australia, but
quite hypocritical of me to criticise.
But she was going to Australia. She wasn't going to Kiev, was she?
I don't know what the security concerns.
Let's get back to the subject. The man here in the blue shirt.
Thank you. I was fortunate enough to be in a school this morning, and I came across a lady who, I won't say anything, but she was employed by the school to do the cleaning. At the beginning of COVID, she was employed to go around cleaning chairs, tables, doorstops. She was in tears today because she was opening up to a colleague that she didn't have enough to make ends meet. So she's one of those people, it's a terrible expression, is just about managing. And she hasn't got enough food to put on the table, as well as the energy, as well as the food price increases and national insurance. And she works hard.
And you think it should be delayed then, the national insurance?
Absolutely, I should. I know we've got a huge budget.
Okay. The man here.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be delayed. And if the government are so desperate for money, why did Rishi Sunak write off the furlough debt as quickly as he did?
Kavita, obviously this national insurance rise affects employees, but also employers.
It does affect employers as well. I mean, I definitely agree that it should be delayed. You know, especially as the cost of borrowing is lower than expected at the moment. And it affects employers as well. It affects businesses because we're having to pay increased taxes. And businesses have gone through a very tough time over the last couple of years. And again, with the energy rises, I mean, I also run a serviced office business. We've got 20,000 square feet. And it's been absolutely shocking in terms of some of the rises that we've seen just in the last month in terms of our bills. And we can't just go ahead and suddenly start increasing prices. So you're feeling that squeeze all the time. So it impacts everyone. But I absolutely agree that it should be delayed.
You're nodding your head there, Jonathan.
Oh, I think there's no question it should be delayed. I mean, you've got a situation, and people clearly are already aware of it, where every household in the country, and for pensioners as well, are facing a real terms pay cut. You have a situation in energy bills which is close to unprecedented, the average bill heading towards £2,000. The government needs to help people with those factors, and at the minute it's actually going to make it worse by putting up the tax in this way. You're right to say it's a rise of 1.25 percentage points. It's actually a 10% rise overall, so it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. But I also want to say...
But without that increase, so how is the government going to pay for NHS backlog for health and social? Where's the money going to come from?
Absolutely. So the point is, first of all, it doesn't go to social care, and I resent the fact it's been presented that way. It's at least 3 years, probably never, that it will go to social care. So that is deliberately misleading.
So the question I ask is, where should the money come from?
And if you're going to raise money this way, and I think you should raise money for the NHS, it's got to be a fair way of doing so. It should affect all forms of income, people who get income from property, from shares, as well as working people. It's far too narrow.
So a rise in income tax as well? Is that what you're suggesting?
I think there's a range of options that are available. There's a range of taxes that would raise that revenue. But to do it this way and think people aren't going to realise because it's called national insurance rather than another form of tax, it's playing the public for fools, and I think they're onto it.
Charities have already shown in the last quarter that the use of food banks can't cope anymore. So does this mean children will go to school hungry?
Man in the grey jacket.
Where we're talking about people struggling financially, when are we going to see some real investment in towns like Morecambe?
The woman here with the scarf, yes.
It needs delaying because the household fund, the 500 million household fund, also runs out on the 31st of March. That came in because of the £20 universal credit was taken away by the government. It's take. That's another amount of money being taken off of people. I spoke to somebody from the Citizens Advice and they've told me that the food banks are supposed to be there for emergencies. In Morecambe, every day is an emergency for a lot of families, so you need to sit up and take note.
Liam.
Well, Rob's absolutely right, of course. There is a triple whammy coming in terms of the cost of living. You've got energy bills. The energy price cap's probably going to go up above £2,000. That's for the average household, from around £1,200 now. An enormous increase. You've got not just these NIC rises coming in April, but also the freezing of the basic rate tax bracket, which means as we have inflation, more people are dragged into that. And the lady here is exactly right. The CPI, Consumer Price Index inflation measure, is 5.4%. Real inflation is much higher than that. The old RPI that we used to use is 7.2%, and actual inflation, if a big chunk of what you spend is spent on necessities like food and fuel, is much higher. Now, delaying this rise in NICs, let me tell you, it's absolutely possible and makes a lot of sense. Not my words, the words of Professor Jajit Chadha, who runs the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, the UK's most respected and long-standing economic think tank. He said that on my GB News show this lunchtime.
Which is a marvellous plug for your show, Liam. But where's he suggesting the money comes from?
We don't get massive state subsidies, so we have to take our chances, Fiona. There is fiscal headroom to do this.
What a cheap shot. Where's he suggesting the money comes from, then,
It's a £3.5 billion shot.
Liam, where's he suggesting the money should come from, then?
He's saying that if you shelve it, you'll get more growth, because this is a tax on jobs, as a lot of the audience have said. Paul Johnson, who runs the Institute for Fiscal Studies, you'll hear about them when we row over numbers during election campaigns, massively respected. He says there is the fiscal headroom to do this. The trouble we've got now is that there is far too much tax, I would say, on people's work, on their labour, particularly at the lower end of the income spectrum. There's not nearly enough taxation, I would say. I like low taxes in general, but we should be taxing more unearned wealth rather than the people's work with their hands, getting up every day with their alarm clocks to go to tough jobs. And I've got huge respect for the Mirror and Alison Phillips. She's a fantastic journalist, and maybe it was a slip of the tongue, but I don't think this cost of living rise is going to be really hard for everybody. I don't think there's going to be a real terms pay cut, Jonathan, with due respect again for every household in the country. A lot of the laptop classes have done really well during lockdown. They're not paying money on trains. It's been cheaper for them. They spent a lot more time working at home because they don't work in factories. They don't have customer-facing jobs. So I do think there's a case, and I say this, with some reservation, but we are now in a situation where I wouldn't be taxing people at the lower end of the income spectrum, basic rate taxpayers raising their national insurance contributions. If we do need more money, I'd get it from growth and also more tax on unearned income.
The woman here in the brown sweater.
Hi. I earn just above the North West average wage. I'm a single female with no dependents, but all I ever hear is this will affect families, and we will look at a package that will help families and the low paid. And I feel like it's you stand in the corner with your purse open and we'll all dib in and you can have what's left. When is something going to be done for forgotten minorities to include us? We are part of the electorate, we pay our taxes.
Right. Woman in the pink and purple top there, yes.
I'd just like to point out that this very building that we're in, up until last summer, was the food bank. This hall, you can see how big it is, was stuffed with food, and that was in July. It then moved out to another building somewhere else. But the point is, the need has gone up. So can you imagine this place was filled with food for the food families of Morecambe? This is what they needed. And that was before this major crisis hit. It has got significantly worse. And we're not talking about people who are sitting there with their hands out waiting for free food. They are people who are generally working. The majority of our clients in those days were working.
Woman here in the striped shirt.
How can we even be talking about raising national insurance when the figures, the percentages are bandied around left, right and centre? And as you were speaking about, we're talking about this huge raise in inflation, and at 5.4%, I think you mentioned. But the lived experience of people here doesn't sound anything like that number. If we're going to start asking the public to pay more, shouldn't all the figures that we use be accurately assessed and credible? Because people will do things and support things if they know they're based on a true assessment of the facts. And that inflationary figure does not represent what people here are feeling.
So, James, you're not getting a lot of support in the room for the national insurance rise. I think it's a fair summation of what I'm hearing. You said the government's in listening mode, which I think is you softening us up for saying it may well, in fact, get delayed after all. If you were a betting man, would you say it's going to get delayed?
Look, I'm not going to go there because it's not for me to say, and I'm not privy to the conversations. But I mean, I don't think there's a majority. I think it is absolute. Everybody in the room is against it. Everybody in the room is
that
feeling
fair?
the squeeze.
Are you all against it?
Yeah. Everybody at home is feeling the squeeze. You know, what I hear here in Lancashire, I hear in Somerset too. I think.
So why go through?
Well, I think government is looking at what other interventions it can make. I think that the tone of what we've been hearing so far is that whereas Labour have, say, cut VAT on fuel, which actually is a value-added tax, and therefore people with the biggest heating bills make the biggest saving, government's been saying, well, let's make a more targeted intervention.
Don't accept that.
Well, don't accept it,
No,
then,
but
the tone of what government has been saying so far has been around more
if your energy
targeted
bill is a
interventions
massive
for those
part
who
of what
need
you
it
spend
most.
every week, 5% off your energy bill is a very big deal, James.
I'm not disputing that, but the point is that I think the government has been looking, instead of universal measures, are actually things that target those who are most hard-pressed. Now, debate whether or not that's the right approach. We're sitting up and listening, exactly as one of the questioners said that we must. But government has set out a view about how it wants to deal with this, and instead of it being universal measures, which have their merits, gone down a different track.
OK, all right, I'm just...
the Labour policy is to cut VAT on bills, so everyone would have some benefit, because everyone needs some relief, and to increase the scope and eligibility for warm homes discounts so the people in the most need would get the most help. The reason the government aren't doing it is they're trying to save the Prime Minister rather than focus on the things that really matter. That's the bottom line.
I'm going to move on. But before I do, I just want to tell you that next week we will be in London, and the week after that we'll be in Newport. Things may have quietened down politically next week. Who knows? I doubt it, somehow. But anyway, we'd love to hear what you have to say on a whole range of issues. So if you want to be in the audience, London next week, Newport the week after, do go to the Question Time website. You can see the details and apply to be in our audience. We would love to see you. Right, let's take another question now, which is from Graham Morby.
Is the love affair between Boris Johnson and the British public finally over?
Graham, some of us didn't love him that much to begin with, but I acknowledge he was always a difficult opponent. I mean, look, for me, the thing with Boris Johnson is If he told me it was raining, I would go outside and check. And I think that is the problem with everything that he does. And look, it shouldn't take a report to find out if the Prime Minister of this country is telling the truth. And I think we know what went on. We know that his account and his apology, or however you describe it in Parliament, wasn't accurate. And I do think people are seeing that. And I think it's not just about the events of whether it was a party or whether he was ambushed by a cake or whatever. It's that we can't trust the Prime Minister of this country to tell us the truth, and people want, going back to the previous question, a real focus on the things that matter, whether that's energy bills and inflation here in the UK or the very worrying situation in Russia and Ukraine. And we can't have that. And we can't have that because the Prime Minister is focused on himself, and the Cabinet are either preparing their leadership bids or they're trying to ignore this and rally around him, or whatever they're trying to do right now. And we deserve better than that. And I think that is why people are so angry about this.
And, I mean, it's true to tell me that Boris Johnson his approval ratings are plummeting. Keir Starmer's are improving, but he's still got negative approval ratings. Is it fair to say the love affair with Keir Starmer hasn't even begun?
Look, if you look at the result that Labour got in 2019, and you look where we are, Keir Starmer is someone who has repaired so much of the damage. Clearly, there's a long way to go. You can't have a record historical defeat like we had two or 3 years ago and just expect to bounce back. But he's a person of integrity, of ability. He could be the Prime Minister, and he could be the Prime Minister for the right reasons. And that is not what we've got at the minute. And that is what I want from the leader of the Labour Party. And I think that's what the public want from that too.
Liam.
Well, clearly there's righteous anger across the country at what seems to have gone on in Downing Street during lockdown, when so many of us were making so many sacrifices, and rightly so. To what extent the Prime Minister was involved in those parties, instigated those parties, I don't know. I don't think anyone will know for sure until this report comes out. It's a bit like waiting for Godot. You know, it's a tragedy for the Prime Minister personally, because he has actually got a pretty good story to tell. We're at 95% immunity in this country. We had Freedom Day in July, in fairness, contradicting a lot of what the opposition parties were saying. And we, of course, didn't have lockdown at Christmas that a lot of other politicians and SAGE members were calling for. So the Prime Minister held his nerve there, or at least he had his nerve held for him by some of his backbenchers. And I do think that is to his credit. We are in the UK. It's been really difficult for all of us, more difficult for some than others, as I said earlier. But he does deserve some credit for putting us where we are. The thing is, politicians are imperfect human beings, and some of the best political leaders, people like Winston Churchill, people like Bill Clinton in the States, are often people whose morality doesn't always rub people up the right way. He's now put himself, despite his 80-seat majority, despite his undoubted talent as a communicator, which I think everybody would acknowledge, he's now put himself absolutely at the mercy of the political ebbs and flows and fortune. His whole political future is basically in the hands of an unelected civil servant. And there's something a little bit weird about that. There is righteous anger across the country. I'd also say, though, there's also a concern that the media is drip feeding information in order to unseat a democratically elected leader, whatever his failings, and they are many.
No. Woman in the tartan jacket.
Hi. Rory Stewart said that, like, Boris is an inveterate liar, or words to that effect, and many people apparently knew, those around knew that Boris was a liar, has been, and it's part of his political toolbox. So why do we as the electorate have to wait for his resignation? Surely he should be doing this before the Sue Gray outcome.
All right. The woman at the back there in grey.
How are people meant to trust the government when it's just lies after lies after lies? And it seems to be people in power seem to think that they can get away with whatever. And this has been going on for years and years and years.
So do you think he's no better, no worse than any other politicians that have come before?
Pretty much, yeah. And I think this is why you've got a rise of conspiracy theories and fake news and all of this, because people are looking for something to believe in. And they can't believe in the government anymore.
All right, the woman here, yes.
There is no credible alternative, though. When is Labour going to give us a credible alternative to the Conservatives again?
I will come back to you. James, is the love affair between Boris Johnson and the British public finally over?
It's under a lot of strain. People are furious, absolutely furious.
Are you furious?
Yeah.
With him?
Well, with the whole thing, frankly. I just, yeah, I wish that right up front, it was like, right, this happened, that was that. And then we could have had the apology and moved on, but we didn't. I listened to what the Prime Minister said at the dispatch box the other week, and I believe him.
Which bit are you referring to that he said?
Well,
I'm not trying to be facetious. Which bit did you believe?
Well, I believe that... I mean, I think that the thing that came out about the ambush with the cake, I don't know that that's... that's quite as egregious as everybody says. I mean, I think if he's kind of working and people come into a room with a cake, that's not exactly his fault. But the two things that I think have really cut through, three things. The video of the Downing Street staff, he was right to get out and apologise very, very quickly for that because people across the country were furious. The events that happened before, on the eve of the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, people were really angry about that, and he was right to get out and apologise. And then the one that allegedly involved him, the event outside in the garden. I mean, I spent some time as his parliamentary private secretary, so his sort of bag carrier, if you like. And you know, the guy, all prime ministers lead an extraordinary existence. They kind of sit there and people come in, they quickly pre-brief them for what's next, and that meeting happens, and you bounce from issue to issue to issue. And I, on occasion, was that person who came in and said, right, Prime Minister, out in the garden, we've got some people from wherever, you're going to go out, say hello, this is what's going to happen. It's a sort of, from his study to the garden is a 30-second walk. So it makes sense to me that what he said, that as he was going downstairs, he didn't know what he was going to. He was sorry that on reflection he didn't shut it down straight away. I heard him say that at the dispatch box, and I accepted that. Lots and lots of people in my constituency and around the country don't want to accept that, and that's why waiting for Sue Gray's report is necessary and important. But just if I may, Jonathan said that the problem is this is a big distraction. Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, since this story broke, the Partygate thing, Omicron came, and I was sat in meeting after meeting after meeting over Christmas in which the Prime Minister was laser-like focused on the booster campaign. In the last few weeks, we've seen the biggest build-up of troops on the European continent since 1945. And I can tell you that I've been in meeting after meeting where the Prime Minister has been laser-like focused on the threat to our national security that presents. Last night, he came across to the Ministry of Defence and was briefed by the Chief of the Defence Staff about what all this means for us. And he sat there for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I can tell you that he was not distracted. He was entirely focused on making the right decisions for our country at a very challenging time.
Alison. I think that the mirror is what started us on this journey.
Yes.
But the question is the love affair with Boris Johnson and between Boris Johnson and the British public finally over?
Well, I think it's a really interesting line that about a love affair because Boris Johnson is almost like one of those blokes that a friend might go out with, and he lies and he lies and he lies to them, and then he'll come back and say, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, I didn't mean it that time," and then he does it again, and he lies about something else, and still he gets forgiven, and then at some point you just sort of think, but you could do so much better than this. And we as a country where our values are about honesty and about decency and integrity, and I think the lady that said all politicians are the same, I'm not sure that's entirely true. I mean, I've never voted Conservative in my life. However, when we had a Prime Minister like Theresa May, she may have had faults, but I think she had integrity, I think she had honesty, and I think what we've got with Boris Johnson is a very different thing in that. So when we first ran this story back in 1st of December, it was, we sort of first had this story about the parties, and then another one came out, and I was saying to our politics editor and our news editor, I was saying, are you sure about this? Are you absolutely sure? If we've been back, if we checked it, I said, because I cannot believe I cannot believe that people would be that stupid to do something like this during this point. And B, but what about, we were all we were all sat at home. We were everyone, no one was doing anything like this. No one I know was doing anything like this. And so, do they think they're on some higher plane to the rest of us? And of course, this all came on the back of this came on the back of like last year. Was it last year that we'd broken the story about Dominic Cummings going to Barnard Castle again? At the time, we thought, I can't believe this. Nobody I know is going out the front door, let alone going to Barnard Castle. And we can understand. Then we can understand why would Boris Johnson stand by this man? But of course, it was obvious why he was standing by this man, because they were all at it all the time, breaking the rules. And it does matter, because those who make the rules have to live by the rules. And it's about our democracy is based on trust and decency and honesty. And if we can't trust the Prime Minister, it just all falls apart. It's like any relationship. If you can't trust the person you're talking to, it becomes dysfunctional. So now we've had this situation with Pen Farthing, the guy who came back with all the dogs and cats, haven't we? And you look at that and you think, well, there's about 6 or 7 emails now which would indicate that they were put at the front of the list and the Prime Minister did put them. And he's still saying today, oh, this is, what was the word he used? Rhubarb. I mean, just the use of the word, it's like it's in some sort of Just William sort of play rather than actually running the country. So
cartoon character, Rhubarb and Custard.
Yeah. And but then I think, well, who do we believe? Who do we believe anymore about anything? And that's why I think it's just, it's got to end. It has to end. And really, I think, you know, James, you're an honourable, decent man. You fought in the British Army. How can you sort of feel connected with that? It's embarrassing for you.
All right, I'll come back. The woman in the glasses there. Yes.
I haven't got much in common with Boris Johnson, but I do have a June birthday. And in June 2020, I celebrated my birthday sitting on the beach with 4 friends. So I just kind of want to know what lessons this government have taught us about the importance of following regulations. Because I did that because I needed to. But I've since found out that the people making the rules didn't even, do that.
All right. And the woman in the stripy T-shirt here.
Before, James said that Boris, has got to... he was furious with him and the decisions that he's made. If he feels like that, well, then why hasn't he called for the Prime Minister to resign?
I'm going to come back to you both. Kavita.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. As a leader, people put your trust in you. So, where it is now, we're seeing that trust has been lost. And it's many situations. We've had the Partygate scandal, we've had the Afghanistan emails that have come out, and backtracking. And that posed a problem, because tomorrow, as our leader, if Boris Johnson needed to put into place more sanctions, would the British people listen?
What, on Russia, you mean?
No,
sanctions on us in terms of COVID restrictions, right?
Any restrictions, would the British people listen? It could be bedlam. So this is a problem. And I think that Boris Johnson and the government really need to get a grip of this situation, and maybe the best thing is that Boris Johnson does resign. Because, I have a workplace. I know the difference. I know the difference between a party and a meeting. And, when you hear these things from very senior leaders, it's quite, you can't believe what you're hearing.
OK. I'm going to come back to you both. So, Jonathan, the point from the woman there that she might not be too happy with what the government's saying, but Labour's not cutting it for her either.
Yeah, so I would say directly to you, I've been a Member of Parliament for 11 years. I've been in opposition for the entirety of that time. I've lost 4 general elections in a row whilst obviously winning my own seat. So I have the humility to know, yes, we can't just rely on the government falling apart. We've got to do more, and we are doing more to win your trust. But how do we do that? You demonstrate it, you don't just say it. So go back to the question about energy. We put forward a plan. Everyone here would take at least £200 off their energy bill, and for those people who hit the most, it would be £600. And how would we do that? We'd do that through a windfall tax on the North Sea oil and gas producers. So we've got a clear view of how we would pay for that too. And that's how you win that trust back. You offer solutions, you don't just criticise the government. And yes, we've got further to go, but that's what we're doing while this government are mired in their own scandal, and we'll continue to do it and hopefully eventually win the support of people like yourself.
And James, what's your response to what you're hearing here?
Well, firstly, if you win trust by delivering, and the government is delivering in spades, there is the vaccine campaign and the way that this country is emerging from the pandemic is world-leading. We are leading.
We have got the highest death toll in Europe and one of the highest in the world.
We are leading.
Not per head.
We are leading
Not per
on
head,
one of the greatest geopolitical challenges of our time. There are more people in work and more vacancies for work than ever before. So, actually, these things haven't happened by accident. These things have happened by good decisions made by
But you
the Prime Minister.
hear what the
And
audience
lady over
here
there
is saying, though, James.
Well, the lady over there said, how can you be furious? And then said, I mean, all I said is I'm furious with the whole thing. And there are things that...
Well, she's saying, how can you be furious and not want him to resign?
Because there are things that have happened that I don't think the Prime Minister is culpable for. But I think it is right that he has apologised for because they happened within
But it is a
number
cultural
10.
thing.
And then just finally on the Afghanistan Nowzad thing.
Should we just explain? So this is, for those who may not be aware, there was a chap called Penfarthing who ran an animal rescue shelter in Kabul, I think it was, in Afghanistan. At any rate, he was campaigning to get his animals out. There was quite a publicity campaign around that. In the end, he did get his animals out. Emails have emerged which suggest... emails leaked from the Foreign Office, I believe, which suggests that the Prime Minister authorised that. The Prime Minister has absolutely categorically denied that.
So the Royal Air Force deploys and undertakes missions through one route only, and that is from the Prime Minister through the Secretary of State Defence to the Chief of the Defence Staff to the Royal Air Force. The Prime Minister did not at any point tell the Secretary of State for Defence or the CDS or anybody else in the MOD that he wanted any course of action whatsoever taken with regard to Penfarthing's animals.
And could he have told anyone else?
The problem now is, though, because we don't trust him, because all the other stuff has gone on, we don't trust... That may well be true. What you say may well be true. But we don't trust the Prime Minister anymore because of all the other stuff that we know he's lied about. And
some people still... You can't say we. You can't speak for the whole country with all respect.
I know, but I think...
A lot of the people want to give him the benefit of the doubt. A lot of people are sick of journalists trying to unseat him.
But, well, I mean, I also think
you can't say we don't trust the Prime Minister because some people still...
Well, tell you what, hang on, Alison, hang on 1 second, because there's a woman there who applauded that point, so let's hear from you. Are you one of those people who's sick of it?
No, I'm not sick of him.
No, sick of it, sick of it.
I'm sick of it. I'm sick of the journalists. I'm sick of the media. You said yourself right at the beginning that you've never voted Conservative.
Yeah.
So straight away, you're going to go gunning, aren't you?
First and foremost...
If that was a party...
Yes.
Then don't invite me because I won't be bothered putting lipstick on to go to it. And yes, I can see the difference between a work meeting and a party. And that wasn't a party.
Which one are you referring to?
The one where they're out on the terrace. Those people were working together, and you're exactly right with what you're saying. He's told where to go. He's briefed and told, and he'll just go and walk into situations. All this rubbish, absolute nonsense about parties, this, dogs, this, something else. Can you not see we've got a major things happening on a double? We could be on the step of a Third World War. Yes. And you're talking about cheese and wine.
All right, well, on that note...
Well, we have got the police investigating it as well.
Oh, yeah, good. Right,
yeah. You're definitely not going to finish that one, I can tell you. On that note, let's take another question from Helen. Helen Johnson, where are you? Ah, there you go.
What are the implications for the UK if Russia invades Ukraine, and should we get involved?
So there you are. We are dealing with that issue. That is a question that a number of you asked. Liam, you were a former man in Moscow for The Economist.
Yeah, I spent a lot of my adult life living, working in Moscow, journalist, academic, variety of consultancy roles and so on. I mean, we're right to be concerned and we're right to be focusing on this, and thank you very much for your question. I think along with the cost of living crisis, it is second to the cost of living crisis of what we should be thinking about, but it is second in what we should be thinking about. I look at the Russian press, I look at the Ukrainian press. While, of course, Russia is an extremely capable military power and a pretty important economy, by the way, I don't see the population being prepared for some kind of attack on Ukraine, for some kind of invasion. If you talk to Russians who are under 30, they want Ukraine to be independent, and they're the people who would actually have to fight this war on the ground. So I don't think there's going to be an invasion anytime soon.
So what do you think Putin's doing then?
If I'm honest. And I don't think many people in Ukraine think so either. I mean, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, I mean, he's just told Joe Biden, who just took his diplomats out of Kiev very dramatically, they'd be safer in Kiev than they are in Los Angeles.
So what is Putin after then, do you think?
Clearly, in the Donbass, 500 miles east of Ukraine, there is a lot of tension. And I think people like James, our armed forces in general, for whom I have a great deal of respect, are right to be preparing and to be saying what they're saying. But if you go back to the mid-90s, when I was living and working in Russia full-time, one of the time periods I spent there, you had people like George Kennan. George Kennan was the diplomat historian, the architect of America's post-war foreign policy, the architect of Soviet containment. He said that expanding NATO was a fatal mistake. And I'm not saying that Poland shouldn't have joined NATO and the Eastern European countries shouldn't have joined NATO. But if you try to expand NATO right up to the borders of a really big geostrategically important country of 11 time zones, then you are going to get a reaction. And what you will do is you will empower anti-internationalist forces in Russia, nationalist forces in Russia, people who are a lot more nasty than Vladimir Putin, by the way. And so if we are going to diffuse this situation, and we need to, Russia's the biggest energy exporter in the world. It's the biggest wheat exporter in the world. Ukraine's the third biggest corn exporter in the world. This is really important for the cost of living crisis. If you are going to diffuse the situation, as well as preparing and standing up to forces that you think are unjust, you also sometimes in politics and diplomacy and journalism have to demonstrate nuance, turn the telescope around, try and look at it from another country's perspective. And from the perspective of a lot of Russian people, I'll get slammed for saying this, but I know it's true, they think to expand Ukraine right up to the border of Russia is
NATO,
very incendiary. I mean, think back to the Cuban Missile Crisis when Nikita Khrushchev brought armaments to Cuba, which is 100 miles away from the US with a sea in the middle. That almost caused a nuclear war. So we should be very, very careful what we're doing here and not just be belligerent, but also try to understand other countries' points of view.
Let me bring the rest of the panel in. James, A to what Liam is saying, but also the question is, what are the implications for the UK if Russia does attract Ukraine, and should we get involved?
So I could talk for a week on it, so give me a kick.
You definitely don't do that.
Exactly. So why should we get involved? Why does it matter? Well, I think that, first of all, just to be absolutely clear, nobody is talking about British troops being on the ground involved in any sort of conflict with Russia. Just so everybody's clear on that. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and so our obligations that we have to NATO countries don't apply, and everybody's been very clear about that. And actually it's very important that we're clear on that for the sake of Mr. Putin, because I think he would love to be able to say to the Russian public that we're all spoiling for a fight. We're not. But it matters because Ukraine is a close ally. And it is a sovereign nation that has existed for a generation. And we cannot be comfortable with another country just deciding that it is going to annex another. The international response, I would argue, after Crimea was not good enough.
So what should we do?
It's not acceptable.
What should the
UK
response be?
The Donbass. Well, I think what we have to do is be, first of all, very, very clear with the Russian public, because Liam is 100% right. I don't think that the Russian public are willing to suffer tens of thousands of Russian casualties in the name of a Putin vanity project. But I think Mr. Putin is being told, wrongly, that the Ukrainians are going to welcome him as a liberator. In reality, and I can tell you from having looked in the eyes of the Ukrainian armed forces, they are going to fight.
So what should we do? That's the question.
Well, what we have to do is give the Ukrainian armed forces every chance of succeeding. We have. The reason I was in Kiev 10 days ago was to do the final detail around the delivery of the anti-tank missiles that we've provided. We need to lead within the international community to make sure that the financial sanctions that await Mr. Putin if he crosses that border are the most punitive that you could imagine. And we need to be absolutely clear with him and the Russian public that this will not be accepted, that what awaits them is a proud sovereign nation facing an existential threat that will fight every step of the way, and that at this 11th hour, turn back to diplomacy, don't cross the border.
Yeah, I think what you fail to mention what the UK produces is Ukraine is oil and gas, and I think that's what the issue is.
Not to any great degree oil and gas.
They do. I've read it today, and they do produce a lot of oil and gas, and I think that's why this issue's come into a head.
It's about oil and gas transportation across Ukraine. You're right in that sense.
You're talking about the Nord Stream pipeline.
No, the Nord Stream pipeline is to the north of Europe.
Yes, avoids Ukraine. Yes, the man here in the blue jumper.
You talk about sanctions against Russia, but can't Russia employ sanctions against us? I mean, by cutting off the gas supply?
Yes, well, of course.
Or cutting off anything else that they supply?
Well, of course, that is one of the big concerns. Jonathan?
Helen, there would be significant implications for the UK if the worst happens, but we should be unequivocal in our support for the people of Ukraine. Clearly, the security situation in Europe would be transformed. We'd be less safe. We'd go to the days when big countries feel they can be in charge of the affairs of those around them, and for the rest of the world, for the Pacific, for China, for Taiwan, it would be a domino effect that none of us, I think, should wish to contemplate. In terms of what it means, and Liam, I really respect your view and your experience of Russia, but I would say, if you look at who controls Russia, if you look at the security elite and how they have looted that country's wealth at the expense of ordinary people, you can't blame the younger people in Ukraine for looking towards the West and wanting something for themselves, which is, frankly, much better than that. And I think we should share that aspiration, and we shouldn't see this being as some return to Cold War politics where Putin thinks he can just go in and take over. So it will be difficult, Helen, and we shouldn't underestimate that.
I don't think they should have to choose. They should be able to live and work where they want.
But that is not what
they don't have to choose between West and East.
Well, no one's having Ukraine. No one's suggesting Ukraine joins NATO. There are 100,000 Russian troops right now around Ukraine. So really, is it the Russians who are willing to let us do that?
Young people of Ukraine, either Europe or Asia and Russia. I mean,
we're not surrounding
why can't they do business everywhere?
That's
what will ensure peace.
All right,
business.
Let's hear a bit more. Yes.
What I was going to say is, how far do you let someone go before you intervene?
So how far do we... Is Putin allowed to go before we intervene?
So how far is Putin allowed to go? Is he allowed to... We're saying we're not going to let him go into
Ukraine.
The Ukraine. But if he steps over the line, we're going to impose sanctions. And then, how far is it going to go? How far do you let someone carry on?
OK. Alison?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Putin's clearly had his sights on recreating a sort of Soviet-style empire for many, many years. And he's also done a pretty good job of, like, destabilising other countries across Western Europe as well. And, you know, he poisoned people on British soil. So he's a nasty little bully, is exactly what he is. And we have got to do everything we can to support the people from Ukraine, there'll be people there tonight who might be thinking that in the next few weeks their sons and daughters might be dying at the hands of the troops that are now gathering on that border. So yes, you know, as James said, we can be there. We can be brutal about sanctions. We should be looking at all that sort of dirty Russian money that's been swirling around London for years, and we should be doing everything we can to support the Ukrainians. But we've also got to try and find a way to, if at all possible, to diffuse it before it gets to that point. But the key thing, if we're going to show real strength against Putin, who wants to act the hard guy, is to have real unity across Europe. Absolutely. And there, I think, it's not been great this week. Some of the things we've seen from France and Germany, but really, the only way you stand up to somebody like that is to show that you're strong and you're united.
Absolutely agree. You've got a bully there, and the West has to show that they are united, because it could have serious implications. You've got economic implications. 40% of the gas going from Russia and does go through Ukraine. And then you've got the human cost, innocent Ukrainian lives. So we have to support Ukraine, and we have to mobilise the Ukrainian troops through training and however we can to support them, because it's a big implication. But he's got to understand that the West are united and will pose sanctions, because he is an absolute bully and that we are serious, and that's the only way to stand up to something like this. So, we have to support the Ukrainians.
OK, let's take a final question from Fiona Walkington.
In 2015, David Cameron and George Osborne visited Morecambe and extolled the northern powerhouse. The current Prime Minister talks about levelling up. When will the north-south divide finally be addressed?
And you're asking this question, Fiona, how does it feel for you? How did it feel for you, Fiona, in terms of the north-south divide?
That we're not really making any progress, not just in terms of the high-speed rail, but in terms of local transport as well, local opportunities for young people and investment in the north.
All right. Alison.
As to when it will happen, I fear it may still be quite some time yet. So the last election was fought heavily on this slogan about levelling up. 2 years on, yes, we've had a pandemic, it's been horrendous, but we've seen very little action in this area. I mean, we've seen, as you said, about the high-speed rail links, but beyond that, it's the local things. It's about the reduction in bus routes. It's about the closing of high street shops. It's about, you know, taking away the uplift in universal credit, which means people haven't got as much money to spend. It's about all the things we've been saying about the cost of living, the national insurance hike. That means people haven't got money in their pockets to spend on their high streets. It's endless, the number of things, and it's this drip, drip, drip. I mean, even this week there was a story that came out about for every 1 job that's created in the north, 3 jobs are created in London and the South East. So it kind of feels almost that we're going in reverse. And I think this government now has to sort of, on so many things, that think slogans are not enough. People want to see action because they deserve action. This is a fantastic town. You've got great people, great opportunities, but there's got to be the support, the infrastructure, the working with private investment to get businesses to move here, to actually use all those talents that are here so that it can thrive. And that's what people need to see.
We'll need to be reasonably brief. You haven't got a lot of time. There's the man at the back.
So you've got the Eden Project North that's planning permissions about to get put in for that. It's going to need government funding. About 70 million, I think, is the figure. A lot of money in other places. Should it be coming to Morecambe, it's going to have a great boost for the area economically. For a long, long time to come. It will really uplift the area.
Is the government going to fund it? I'm sure you've done your swatting up on the local area, James.
I was tipped off about Eden North. I'm afraid I haven't come with good news. That doesn't mean there's bad news. It just means that I don't think the decision's been made. Do you want me to answer the rest of the question?
Sure.
Yeah. So I was really worried when I was on the train up that you would ask the levelling up question as a north-south thing, because I'm a south-west MP, and actually it's not a north-south thing, it's a south-east and London thing versus the rest of the regions of the UK. And I was worried that I might not get out of here alive having to say that, but similarly I wouldn't get re-elected if I wasn't clear on that. We in the south-west share your pain about sort of, you know, investment and prosperity and feeling like we haven't been invested in for a number of generations.
Well, you're in government. And the levelling up white paper is just days or weeks away, which is the centrepiece of it all. But I think, look, there is stuff going on. I know that Morecambe isn't in the Towns Fund, but I think that Preston is, and there are some other Lancashire towns, and I've got some down in Somerset that have got it too. That is
Richmond
a catalytic. That is a catalytic intervention. I know there's debate over exactly what the £96 billion on rail is doing, and some people think it's doing the right thing, some people are doing the wrong thing. But it is the single biggest investment in our railways ever.
I'm going to have to move around the panel, James, forgive me.
You've been let down for decades. This government is starting to turn that around. But give us a chance.
Let's hear from the rest of the panel. Kavita, you wanted to come in.
In terms of levelling up, absolutely, you know, it was one of the 2019 manifesto, and, you know, so much is needed in the northern cities. I'm actually from Derbyshire, in Derby, and I'm pleased to say we were one of the 105 areas that got a bid in November for 70 million. One of our projects in Derby South got 50 million, and that's going to support 5,000 houses, a green village, roads to one of our biggest employer, which is Rolls-Royce, and create growth. However, there's so much more to do. You know, a lot of the levelling up task force, a lot of the civil servants, the 2/3 are still London-centric, and we need that to be spreading so that local decision-making can happen in places like Morecambe.
All right.
So,
Jonathan?
I mean, I grew up in Sunderland, and I live now my adult life in Tameside in Greater Manchester, and I understand, James, the point about it isn't just a north-south divide. I get that, but I think there is a serious and genuine point about parts of how this country have worked for some time, that disadvantaged parts, particularly of the northwest, And I would say, actually, nearly every government since the war has tried to do something on this. And the irony is, despite this being your flagship policy, you're one of the worst by terms of delivery. I mean, we don't know what levelling up really means yet, do we? That's why the white paper's coming out. And let's be honest, we're only a year away from probably a general election anyway. The answer, I think, genuinely, is not about moving civil servants around, although I think there's a role for that. It's about jobs. It's about good private sector jobs that you can raise a family on. And that is the problem. The system doesn't give that a big increase in investment, particularly around the transport system and particularly around how we reach net zero, would be how I would do that.
Okay, hang on.
I sense Gailey's impatience, but
well, we're going to run out of time.
We've just made a £5 billion investment in just outside Preston by bringing the National Cyber Force here. Exactly the sort of catalytic intervention that brings a whole industry around cyber security to the northwest.
It's exactly the right question. I'm glad to end on a note of agreement with my fellow journalist Alison on this. When you look at the numbers, I'm a bit of a nerd, I look at lots of numbers of regional imbalance in income per head. We are the most regionally imbalanced major economy in the world. And lockdown made us even more imbalanced because people in towns, particularly in the north of England, suffered so much more during lockdown in terms of their income. I still think HS2 is a white elephant. I would like to see a lot more investment in TransPennine rail route, linking together our fabulous northern cities into an economy which could rival London. These are cities with incredible global brands that can attract huge amounts of investment, huge talent. And we should really be putting money into not massive vanity projects, high-speed trains that are obsolete when they're already built, when it will finally emerge, probably in the mid-2030s or something. We should be putting money into local commuter routes, into buses, into schemes that allow people in towns like this to get to slightly bigger conurbations. That's where the jobs are for you and your kids. And yet all I see is ministers pandering to the big engineering lobby, building a high-speed train that no one wants.
All right. We've got about 30 seconds or so. Let's hear from the woman at the back, in the brown dress. Yes.
Yeah, given the reports of levelling up funds being misused to repair potholes on driveways, how can we have any faith in the levelling up agenda?
All righty. And let's hear from the woman here in the brown top.
I feel that part of the levelling up agenda is based on the contempt that the South East has for any other area of the country. You come out with a slogan and then it's pat you on the head, sit there quietly, we've said what we're going to say, but we're not going to give you any funds for it. We just feel like we're treated with utter contempt by Westminster all the time.
All righty. I think on that note, we will have to end. We are out of time. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you to the panel for coming on this evening. Thank you to our audience here in Morecambe. Great to see you. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. From Question Time in Morecambe. Bye-bye.